Have you been boring yourself with uninteresting podcasts made by monotone and overly serious people? Are you tired of hearing the same stuff every day on NPR? Then please consider helping us on our mission of making Thrive Loud the #1 business podcast. Because, well, let's be honest, we're #1.
A third of the people love you, a third don't care about you, and a third hate you. So you concentrate on the third that love you and you go for it.
I think the greatest Achilles heel for leaders is they don't give themselves time to think.
So my journey is one of those, there are a lot of detours. There's a lot of going off on the side roads.
Thrive Out listeners, you're in for a treat. We're here with Jamal Mashburn,
Jesse Itzler,
the John Maxwell,
Jackie the Joke Man Martling, New York Rangers great Mike Richter, Lisa Lampanelli, Mary Carrillo.
Oh, how nice.
I'm actually going through the practice of being an entrepreneur.
Pick yourself up, brush yourself off, and thrive loud.
Get ready to thrive loud with Lou Diamond.
I love it.
Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond. Wanted in 25 states. Not wanted in 25 states.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond. Today on Thrive Loud, we have a woman who spent 15 years working at today's top tech giants, Google and Facebook. She has conducted talks for thousands of people at major companies and universities in the United States, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific Rim. Her upcoming book, Lean Out, The Truth About Women, Power, and the Workplace, is coming out this June and is definitely going to be a topical book and a hot read for everybody out there from the perspective she is bringing forth. Thrive Loud listeners, originally from Miami, now hailing from the New York City area, Marissa Orr. Marissa, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Very excited to have you. We'll eliminate all the small world combinations of how Marissa came on the show, as everybody just wanted her on. Friends, promotion people, PR people, and I was glad that it all connected together. Our listeners, though, I think want to understand an interesting perspective. As I understand it, you had experienced a frustration from your working experience around the promotion of women in the workplace. I want to initially start with that, and pun intended, lead out towards how this all came together. So with that, Marissa, give us a little background on how this became the topic of what you've been focusing on of late.
So I've always been really passionate about helping women from a young age. I've always been really intrigued by the topic of gender. And then over the years at Google and then at Facebook, obviously then I became very involved in all the women's leadership efforts. But over time, I became really, let's say, disenchanted or discouraged, because the majority of the conversations were about success, and it required us the prescriptions for success required us to sort of adopt the behavior of our male colleagues, instead of really kind of listening to the women in the room and addressing all the real challenges and concerns that we had. It seemed that we were just being lectured by senior executives on what we should be doing. And I just first of all, I couldn't think of anything less feminist or less empowering than holding men up as a benchmark to which we should aspire. And I also was a bit discouraged by the lack of honesty in these conversations. So over drinks after work with my female friends, we would talk a lot about, the issues we were having at work. And there were a lot of common themes and patterns, but then those issues and concerns were never reflected in these public conversations at work and in the national discourse. So there was this disconnect between what really the problems were and what we were trying to solve in public. And that's really what this was all born from. At Google, I ended up writing my own perspective on the topic of female leadership, and as a side passion project. And it kind of grew from there and eventually became the basis for the book.
So this is an interesting perspective for a couple of reasons. One, these two organizations that you worked at are viewed as some of the newer and more innovative workplaces to be at. I might be wrong in this, but obviously they're always well sought after. And I'll even put in the spin on this and maybe a little bit of the irony and intentional irony. There's a certain executive as a female leader at Facebook who had a book of a similar title of Lean In, which is interesting because here's a woman who is representing that. Now, is this something that you feel is specific to the tech industry as you've experienced it, or in your travels and in talking, communicating with many others, it's different in other industries? And I recognize it's a holistic problem, but I want to understand from your unique viewpoint how things are in the tech space versus the rest of the working world.
Sure. So I'll address it's really two parts to the question. The first one is your statement is absolutely true, in that Facebook and Google are two companies that really tout sort of these progressive ethos and stand for a new way of doing business in today's economy. And a lot of other corporations look to them as a model for their own organizations. However, now so I was there for 13 years, and I started when it was still fairly small. There was only about 50 people in the New York office. I think now there's about maybe over 8,000.
Wow.
And I would say back then, it really did have this entirely unique and progressive way of organizing employees and their culture. But over time, as it grew, it really became just like any other large-scale organization. I mean, there's a certain law of human dynamics and in groups. And when corporations grow to the size of Google, there's no way to maintain the same exact culture and ethos that they had when they were small. So in many ways, part of my disenchantment in all of this was this disconnect between what these companies say in public and what actually happens inside of them. And that is sort of the first part to your question, which extends beyond just women. And then when it comes to women at work, I do think there are some, to take a step back, Lean Out really attempts to answer the question, what have we gotten wrong about women at work? Because frankly and clearly, the numbers show that whatever we've been doing for the past 15, 20 years is just not working. And there are some patterns and principles that I think are the same across Google and Facebook and any corporation that affect women similarly. Of course, it's going to differ a bit from industry to industry and company to company, but there are certain universal sort of reasons why the gender gap exists. And I do say in the book, I start out by qualifying the book with this really about corporate America. It's not about small businesses or things of that nature. Because there are some really common, once you have these large scale, big corporate hierarchies, you start to see the same pattern over and over again.
So I also like the perspective that you're coming from, Marissa, because unlike Sheryl Sandberg, who's obviously a billionaire, I guess, at that point, you're coming from a level of employee,
not a billionaire.
Not being a billionaire, exactly, which is many more people in the universe that you're coming from. Let's capture some of the things that you're seeing that you've identified in Lean Out that really highlight some of the true things. Throw some darts at the dartboard here so that the listeners can get a perspective of the specificity of what you're highlighting and the real truths that you're bringing out.
Right. So the premise of Lean In short, really pins the blame for the gender gap on women and offers these prescriptions for them to act more like men by being, to change their behavior, be more assertive and ambitious. Whereas Lean Out really pins the blame on our institutions, which haven't changed really since the industrial age, when at a time where there were no women in the workforce, and the entire economy and the composition of the workforce has changed since then. But these underlying structures of how we organize people have remained exactly the same. And one of the questions I pose is, what makes more sense, rewiring women's personalities or rewiring the system to better meet the needs of a more diverse workforce? So a couple of examples there are the first one is really about rewards. At most large corporations, once you get past a certain level of salary, the only reward left is power, more power over more people, of course, in the form of management. But research shows consistently that not everybody is similarly rewarded by that sort of thing. So you have this big subsection of the work population that really doesn't have anything motivating them to climb higher and higher. And if you're really serious about a diverse set of leaders, you have to have a diverse set of rewards. I mean, this is something we learn in kindergarten, right? Everybody likes different things. But at work, there's only like that one thing that's really pushing people to move higher and higher. And the winners end up being people that are mostly motivated by that. And, research also shows, and I go into this a lot in the book, that women have a greater variety and different types of life goals, fewer that are focused on money and power in a professional sense. And, if making more money and getting to be CEO requires women to compromise their goals by having to work longer hours or playing more politics, reduces the quality of their life, I'm not really sure we can call that success. So I guess another part is redefining success. It's been defined in such a narrow way around money and position on the ladder. And frankly, it's a very kind of male world view. So I wrote this book. I'm obviously very passionate about it. So unless you stop me, I'll keep going.
No, this is good. And I think I want to try to connect the dots a little here too, because there's something really interesting. We've had a lot of unique entrepreneurs of smaller to mid-sized companies come on this program that have really focused on maintaining a lot of what you spoke about when you had that really smaller size part of the company, when Google was really small, and that more manageable piece, and finding ways to figure out the right incentives, the right work balance, getting people to do what they care about, being happy at work, incorporating equality across the board. And obviously in an ever-changing world, in a very gig economy type of thing where people can leave and start their own businesses, which happens naturally, some of these mid-sized, smaller companies are able to really reap the benefits of a lot of the mistakes or cultural quirks, for lack of a better word, that corporate America has, and be able to create that from in middle and smaller sized businesses. And then there are motivating women like yourself who are observant and trying to figure out how to change the dynamic. How do we connect the two together? How do we take powerful women to take a lot of these lessons, by the way, that both women and men have been doing to work better in a smaller work environment, and bring that to a larger corporate world?
It's a great question. And actually, when in the chapter where I talk about systemic solutions, I also mention it pretty extensively that these large dynamics in a big corporation, these power dynamics, not only result in dysfunction like the gender gap, they also crush creativity and innovation. And the underlying symptom is the power dynamic, and the nature of the corporate world is a zero-sum competition, because it ends up concentrating power among people who lust for power, frankly. And it ends up not only sort of in these disproportionate of gender, but also that's why big companies can't adapt or innovate. And the solution is the same across the board from my perspective, right? And this is all new. So I think as we sort of test these new things out, which I'm pretty sure will come from the entrepreneurs and the smaller businesses which are growing, it's really about, so let me take a step back. In that chapter, what I say is that people are diverse by their very nature. And the reason that that's not reflected at the top of the corporate world is because only a narrow subset of personality traits and behaviors are rewarded. So then the solution is to create conditions of trust. And, Google talks a lot about this in their research, psychological safety, so that people can be themselves and contribute the full range of their capabilities. Because what ends up happening is, in order to win, you have to conform to the behaviors and the traits that are required. And that's conformity. It's the opposite of diversity. So creating conditions of trust, allowing people to be themselves and sort of demonstrate their passion and skill in the way that best fits who they are. And, it sounds kind of squishy, like, create psychological safety and trust. So I don't mean that, you have to make everybody in the organization trustworthy. What I mean is you have to have systems in place that employees trust to protect their interests and to reward competence and not punish people arbitrarily, which is really what happens every day in the corporate world. And one of the best ways, I think, to do that are to have systems in place that sort of rebalance power. The government obviously has checks and balances. I really don't understand why that doesn't exist in the corporate world, especially, you mentioned Google and Facebook sort of being held up as the most progressive organizations. There's no checks and balances there either. And it becomes like these tyrannical mini empires within the organization. And it really, people are just unhappy. They're not productive. And the same winners will keep popping up each time unless we really find better ways to detect who's truly competent and, find ways to neutralize people who are toxic and hoard power and really ruin organizations.
We're here with Marissa Orr, the author of Lean Out and the Truth About Women Power in the Workplace. I want to bring up something because this is so freshly topical on my head right now because I just saw the documentary. I just listened to a mini podcast about it. And this all has to do with the documentary was The Inventor. And this has to do with Elizabeth Holmes as a leader for Theranos. And for the listeners who aren't familiar with it, this is the company that was trying to create a way of taking blood by just 2 drops of blood to do similar tests and all that, and trying to reinvent the world with that. And it turned out that there was a tremendous amount of dishonesty, lying, a little bit fake it until you make it, and they never got a chance to make it. And there was a lot of fraud. And this is what go watch the documentary if you haven't got a chance. It's absolutely brilliant. But there was something really interesting that happened that in the podcast that I listened to, which really hit upon an interesting point, that there is this overarching desire to have and put women in these high up places and promote them and put them up because we want to see women succeed and lead. We want to see the next Steve Jobs as a woman. We want to see women further develop at that point. But interestingly, it was trying to isolate in one particular instance. You're trying to work in a place where women are not just the point person leading at the top, but the whole organization can be represented more equally. What did you take from those stories and the perception and the challenges that obviously, because a lot of people obviously were rooting for this, to have someone stand out as a woman in there to inspire other women to do the same. What was your thoughts from the view of what went on with that and your perspective of a very competitive community in the Silicon Valley area, which is where all this took place?
First of all, I loved that documentary. It was so fascinating. And it reminded me of so many things that I write about. One thing that really struck me, which I really connected to, was the fear of people within the organization trying to tell the truth.
Yeah.
That really hit home for me. And in the book, I say, I refer to these little tyrannical empires within a corporation, and tyranny cannot coexist with truth. When managers have absolute power over your livelihood, and frankly, they do, because everybody knows HR is not really there to protect the employees, but the company. When you have these people who have absolute power over legions beneath them, just knowing the laws of human behavior and social psychology, people aren't going to tell the truth because they will be punished for it. So to me, it was a great example of an organization where there was no way for the truth to come out. It was suffocated. I mean, that engineer killed himself. What a tragedy. And I went through that at Facebook. I go into detail in the prologue about my time there, but I suffered as a target for a very powerful senior female executive who was really a bully. And it was one of the most isolating experiences of my life. And I too I had a very naive idea that if I told the truth, obviously this problem would resolve itself. And that was, like I said, very naive and not at all how it worked. I mean, in the end, I'm very grateful for that whole experience, because without it, I would have never written this book and pursued my dream, but that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, so it was really the attitude toward truth that stood out most to me in that documentary. To your second point about people wanting to see women in that position or a female Steve Jobs, I struggle with this question because, you know, I read Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, and I had this whole perspective on him. And, you know, he had flaws like anyone else, and there were brilliant things about him and things that weren't so great. Then I read his daughter's memoir. I actually haven't finished it. And all of a sudden I thought, you know, Steve Jobs, her mother was a hero. You know, I'm a single mom of 3 kids, and I see women all the time being these invisible heroes of the world. And I think we love the shiny and the big Steve Jobs, but really, I think, you know, we just don't recognize true heroes enough and hold them up as role models. And if we did, the composition, demographic, gender of that set would be just as diverse as the population. We just sort of pick these people who, you know, like a Steve Jobs, and, you know, and also we conflate the term CEO with leader, because there's good CEOs, there's bad CEOs. I mean, Kenneth Lay, right? Enron, he was a CEO. Was he a leader? I mean, would you call him a leader? And there's so many examples of that. Why do we want to see women in particular in those positions when those positions require people a lot of times to act against people's interest and their own interest? And I think lastly, and then I'll give it back to you, but, you know, if you look at the distribution of gender over, you know, the workforce, it's really, you know, men are at the extremes, at this extreme low, extreme high. So just because we see them more often in those positions, I don't think it means that women wield any less power in this world. They just wield it in a different way that we don't talk about because it's not as newsworthy.
I think there was something interesting, and going back to that documentary on Elizabeth Holmes and the inventor, there was, this might have been through the podcast that followed up with it, which talked about the professor at Stanford, who was a woman who was the initial person who thought that when Elizabeth was in college that her idea wasn't going to hold water. And this was I forgot her name specifically. We'll put it in the show notes. But she is someone who should be looked up as a role model, a woman who has, you know, got her medical degree, and a well-respected person in the medical community and at Stanford University. And there was this point, like, why wasn't this person looked up to as someone that we should all look at as a woman that we should be? But we all like that bright, shiny new object, as you just said before, that thing that is, you know, getting all that attention in the marketing leads, which is all this tended to be. And I think maybe that is one of the key messages here. And that is that, look, it's more important for doing great work, right? And not just making it that unique unicorn. It's really the ability of creating a culture that promotes great work and great quality, no matter what your gender is, and elevates those and promotes those equally the same. And that's where I think we're all trying to get to. And making that the focus.
Yeah, and that's a big piece of the book, because the problem is, in a knowledge economy, it's really hard in a big organization to tell who's doing a good job, who's working hard, and who's not working at all. It's so easy to fake it. And when you have senior people deciding performance and who gets promoted, most of the time they have absolutely no real idea of who's actually worthy of being promoted. And that's one of the big systems problems that I talk about, because when you're selling things, when you're creating marketing strategies, when you're servicing customers, when you're writing code, all these sort of knowledge economy things where output is not visible and it's hard to know who it should be attributed to, our brains default to proxies of visibility. Whoever talks the most or the loudest or is most visible with their work, who is most self-promoting. We use visibility, we grade on people's performance on visibility instead of competence, because our brains just aren't equipped to really figure out who is deserving. And these traits, these visible traits like aggression, assertiveness, desire for dominance, self-aggrandizement, these are behaviors that they correlate more highly with men. They don't correlate more highly with competence.
Right.
So you're exactly right. We need to reward people who are doing the good job. The problem is right now, we don't know how to find that. And I think I look at companies like Bridgewater, who's using technology and tools to do things our brains aren't equipped to do. Like in the physical world, we need machines to help us build buildings. We use a shovel to dig a ditch, right? Because our bodies can't physically do it. But in the knowledge world, knowledge economy, and when intellect is the output, we sort of, we're just beginning this phase of the economy in the large scheme of things, but we need to start looking to tools and technology to help us do these things our brains aren't equipped to do.
Marissa, I like this, and I want to shift this a little bit to you. And this is your first book, correct? I just want to confirm that.
It is, yes.
What was the writing process like for you? Because this is such a personal message that you have inside of here.
Yes. Oh my gosh, the writing process. It was agonizing. So there were so many things. I love talking about this, but there's so many things I could say. So first of all, I worked in the corporate world for 15 years. And then when I started this journey, it was just sort of being ripped out of one world and, plopped on a seat at home. And then all of a sudden everything's on me. I got to figure this out. And the one thing I am very lucky to have is I'm very curious, and I'm good at learning things. So the first thing I did when I decided to write the book based on those lecture series, I was still at Facebook. And the very first thing I did was Google how to write a book. That was like how much I had no idea what I was doing or experiencing. I've always liked writing, and I've had a talent for it, but I've only written email, thousands and thousands of emails. So I looked that up, and I really just learned everything that I could. And when it came to actually writing the book, I had to basically change my entire personality structure, because I am very impulsive. I need instant gratification. I'm not very disciplined. I'm very creative, so I'm all over the place. And of course, writing a book requires an inordinate amount of discipline. And I had started meditating when I was at Facebook. I became a straight up Buddhist from that whole experience. But that was a good first step. I learned everything I could about discipline, and I read all these books written by writers about writing. And I got every morning. I just sat there and I just wrote, and it was really hard to write for a year and a half, pretty much into a vacuum. You don't have any feedback whatsoever. You spend a year doing something and you have no idea whether it's like a piece of crap or actually something that people will read and find valuable. So this is one of the hardest things I've ever done. I look back, I still don't know how I was able to do it. But it's so gratifying once it's done. And it is personal to me, but that part wasn't difficult. I'm so easily able to share my own truth to a fault. So it really wasn't that part. It was how to translate that into words that would help me and my message be best understood. I had this fear of being misunderstood. So I agonized over how to say certain things. But the writing process, it was very unglamorous. It was every morning, my butt in the seat, certain amount of time. I got like a Pomodoro timer. It really was just doing the hard thing every single day and learning how to manage the anxiety that comes along with that.
It's really funny. We've had tons of authors on the program. And first of all, we're going to give a little bit of credit to you because you're probably the first person to ever front run one of the questions on the Thrive Loud program. For the regular listeners know, I love to ask, when you have trouble thriving, who or what practice do you seek to get back on the thriving track? I think we learned in there the meditation guru that you became along the way. But I want to get back to the writing. We have had people who orate their book first, who literally have it all in their head and spew it out in a weekend, that don't care what other people think about what they write down or their.
I envy those people. Yeah. I really do. I try and be like them every day.
I think it's really an interesting process because what is so nice about whether you're creating a podcast program or whether you're creating content like yours in the book, how people absorb it and how people take it is also going to be personal to them. And when you write a story, which obviously has a lot of your personal experiences in it, it becomes a part of you. And so you're basically now sharing yourself with the world. And, there's the perception. Are you okay to share with yourself and let everybody have a little bit of a piece and take an opinion? Or sharing yourself, no big deal. That's exactly what I want. I want everyone to have that. Well, I think it's a combination of both. But kudos to you. This is impressive. I hope you're happy with it.
Thank you. I'm happy it's over. that it's written. And, I think with anyone who writes something or creates something, they look at it and see it a million ways they could have done better. But just having gone through that difficulty, I'm just so happy to have done it, and I am proud of it. So we'll see what everyone else thinks, but I will try not to care what they think.
Exactly. That's well, what I will tell you, because I've had the fortune of having a good copy of it, get it, and I kind of scan things, and I think you have something here, and I think this is going to be a popular one. So let's do the admin part of the show here right now, Marissa. Share with everybody where they could find you, where they could get the book, and when it's coming out, all the news, and we will put it all in the show notes, but it always sounds better when it comes from you.
On Twitter, I'm Marissa __ Orr. And yes, we are changing that because that is such a beast to say, but it's Marissa, Marissa, and the last name is Orr, ORR, with 2 underscores in the middle. I think the first time I did a podcast, I realized that has to change immediately. And you could also find me at my website, marissaorr.com. The book is available for pre-order on Amazon. And if you want half the book immediately in a digital copy, you can go to leanoutthebook.com. HarperCollins is offering half the book immediately for digital download if you pre-order it, and then you get the full book on the release date on June 11.
Well, very cool. And we will make sure we put all those links there, and then we'll have a little bit more fun with you. I've got a couple more questions to take this Thrive Loud interview home. I'm going to take the signature question first, and then we're going to go down another avenue. Marissa Orr, what is your all-time favorite movie?
I'm sure everyone says, it's like picking my favorite child. It's so cliche, but it's true. I will say one that's most top of mind right now, which is Clueless. I watch it, it's one of my father's my father is very academic and intellectual, but he friggin' loves that movie. So we bonded over that. And now my daughter and I watch it all the time together. So I would have to say Clueless.
What specifically is your favorite part of component of that movie that resonates the most with you?
There's so much about that movie I love, but I'll just tell you one absolutely true thing that just happened. So I practice a lot. I feel like with gender, I'm going to get a lot of tough questions and people are going to try and be provocative. So sometimes I practice my answers. So about an hour ago, a question popped to mind, and the answer that came to my mind was a scene from Clueless, which is one of my favorite scenes when Cher, Alicia Silverstone, is debating Amber about Haiti. And Cher talks about, her mother or father's dinner party. And Amber goes, Mr. Hall, how can I answer that? You asked about Haiti and she's talking about her father's dinner party. And that was the answer that came into my mind. Imaginary scenario when an interviewer asked me a tough question, my answer was Amber. That's me to answer that. And that's one of my favorite parts. I know that was a much longer version of an answer, but I just had to share that because it literally just happened.
So Marissa, if it makes you feel any better, I happen to love that movie. And one of my favorite characters, and someone I've actually gotten a chance to know personally through family and friends, is the actor Dan Hedaya, who plays Alicia Silverstone's father in the movie. And
oh my God, my father loves him when he says, I have a shotgun and a shovel.
No one will miss you. I think I've now said that to a couple of my daughter's boyfriends. And yes, it's accurate. I have a shotgun and a shovel and no one will miss you.
Yes, my father, I have to tell him that he loved, that's his favorite line of any movie, but go ahead.
No, it's great. And that was what I was going to get at is it's just such a great character and a fun movie, but also like lighthearted, but serious at the same point. Talk about all the different movies out there. We love talking about this. We're a fan of that one. Okay, so we checked that. We got over the movie question. Now I'm going to ask the question. Google or Facebook? Which did you enjoy working at more?
Oh my gosh, Google a million. I loved Google. My friends there were like family.
Now, you were there for a very long time, as I understand it, right? I forgot how many years at Google?
13.
Okay. I guess the hardest thing is when you leave one tech company and go to another, it's hard not only to get out of the culture of what one company could be to the other, but it's also hard to maybe stop using certain things. Was there something that when you left one tech company and went to the other that you had to kind of stop using? Maybe it could have been the way you used your email or the way you used a certain app or a certain function that worked in one environment over another. Did that happen to you? Because I've had stories of people who've done that and said it was awful. Yeah. So
I could write a book about this. I mean, I used Gmail and Google Apps for 10 years. In fact, I used to go and volunteer with the Google Apps team and where they were deploying at big hospitals or organizations. When it first came out, I would go volunteer and teach people how to use it. And then transitioning from that to Facebook, Microsoft's Outlook. And then they had their own internal hack tool for calendar. And then you had to use Facebook groups for work, which was the worst thing you could ever imagine. Oh my gosh. I didn't know how to schedule a meeting for maybe a month. I could not, I had no idea. It was really back to square one. And it was excruciating, actually. Much harder than you would think, but it's like you're switching your whole paradigm of how you operate.
I will tell you, I've heard very similar stories. Someone who, this goes way, way back, someone who worked back in the days of Lotus, actually then went to Microsoft and supposedly had to deal with, going from Lotus 1, 2, 3 to Excel. And then obviously similar stories to what you've shared about going from a company like Google to another and having to move to those platforms. I always laugh about that. That really is hard. The one I could never imagine would be going maybe from Apple to IBM or to a PC company, because that would just break me. I wouldn't be able to do it. So.
Oh, because like going from a Mac to a PC.
Oh, it would be impossible. I was in a PC world for decades working on Wall Street. And then once I moved over to a Mac, there's no going back. So I'm sorry.
Google, we used to be on PCs. I had a IBM Lenovo, and then years ago we had to switch to Macs, and I still miss that Lenovo.
It's what you get used to.
Yeah, exactly. First world problems.
Exactly. Marissa Orr, very much looking forward to Lean Out coming in. Thank you so much for coming on Thrive Loud. Continued success in your efforts, speaking, getting the book out there, and really helping to push the truth about women power in the workplace, because I think this is a great message and glad you're shepherding it.
Well, thanks so much. This was super fun.
Awesome. And to all our Thrive Loud listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep thriving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
Hey, you. Anything happens to my daughter, I got a 45 and a shovel. I doubt anybody would miss you.
Bye, Daddy. You've been listening to Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond. Now that you've heard this amazing episode, you really need to subscribe and hear all our episodes. Head on over to thriveloud.com and subscribe on whatever platform you listen to your podcasts. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Thrive Loud. Thanks for listening.